Hi, I'm Denise.
And I'm Tom.
And welcome to our podcast, Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
We created our podcast for you, our nonprofit colleagues. As nonprofit professionals with over 50 years of experience combined, we've led nonprofit hospitals, university programs, campaigns that have transformed cities, communities, and campuses. We're from Chicago and Detroit, and now we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our work has taken us across the country from the Midwest to Seattle, to Portland, California, and nationally. We've seen it, lived it, and have learned from it.
We've all been through a lot as nonprofit professionals, and we hear you, we see you, and we understand. We know you, too, are used to wearing many hats. It can be exhausting, but we come together with the shared mission to transform the world. Because We've Been in Your Shoes is a podcast for you, us, and our entire nonprofit community, sharing and learning from one another so we can continue to innovate and unleash capacity for good. We'll hear from colleagues and peers, discuss emerging issues in the sector, and provide you with key takeaways and useful tips to support you in all you do. We believe that people and philanthropy equal possibilities. Join us on the Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast with new topics and special guests. Thank you for joining us for the conclusion, and here's where we left off.
I think that now people are really looking at that more. And I would say casting the net differently, like maybe do some non-traditional methods, like looking on LinkedIn, looking at people's profiles and to see who you can. And I know everyone doesn't have the time for this, right? Especially with nonprofit organizations. They don't always have this big HR staff to do this. And looking at organizations like what we just talked about, Women of Color and Fundraising and Philanthropy, I know there's like African American development officers, I just think being more intentional with that and not saying that you only have to recruit through there, but are you at least tapping into these organizations? And I think even like tapping into historically backed colleges and universities so that like you're getting people out of college into organizations. And I think that all of those things can be beneficial.
That's right.
I love your perspectives. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I mean, you're giving us a lot of great tips and takeaways. So
yeah, I agree.
I'm sure people appreciate hearing those.
Yeah, and let me just add, Denise and I have talked about transferable skills as another one, right?
Yes.
I think sometimes what we end up doing, we end up getting the same people because we're looking for someone that does this so we can bring them in and just do the job. But we have to take the time out, as you said earlier about, and I love the word you've been saying is intentional. If I'm going to hire someone and I want a diverse background, that means I'm going to have to spend the time as a leader, as a supervisor, to help them grow in that area. If I get someone from outside the field, that's how we're going to diversify.
Absolutely. I think I absolutely agree. Like there's so many transferable skills, like you mentioned, that people overlook sometimes because they're looking for something very, very specific. And then I think that a lot of people, when they're looking to hire someone for their team, it's always this, well, will you fit into our team culture? Well, where you fit into our team culture?
Oh, yes. I hate that.
And it's kind of like, well, maybe your team culture has to be shaken up a little bit, because like if you truly want diversity of like not just color, but ideas and experiences, you shouldn't be looking for, oh, is this going to be the person that I'm going to like hang out with after work and have coffee with?
Right.
And I think that some people are looking for that. And it's like, well, let's expand that. Like, what can this person bring to the team that doesn't exactly look just like us,
That's right. I just got to share with you the culture question. That question was asked of me, and I got really quiet in the meeting. And I finally said, it's better if you ask me if I align with your values, with your vision, your mission, not your culture, because I don't want to fit into your culture. I want to make sure that we align. The room went really quiet, and I want to see what happened after that. But
I appreciate you bringing that up too, LaKesha. I know as a woman, I can speak from this in the interviewing and hiring practice too, as someone with a different perspective and experience too. I oftentimes find women, and an area that I want to dive into, tend to have more interviews and we have to prove ourselves and our experience.
Yes.
Leaders in the organization fail in this area. And what I mean by that specifically is the lack of training. So I'll give you an example. This is in the 90s. We were doing an interview, a young lady. It was three guys, well, actually five guys. We're interviewing a young lady. At one point, one of the guys asked the young lady if she planned on getting married and having
Oh
kids.
my.
So
Oh God.
when the guy
Oh
asked
my
this
God,
to
I'm just cringing.
myself and the one guy, I was a me and the one guy, we just and the audience can't see my head, but we slowly just turn our head and we asked the question. And we didn't say anything. The young lady never caught on. She left. And then the manager got up and said, "Hey, we just hired her." And the other three guys,
Yes, you just
yeah, the
hired
three
her.
guys
Yeah,
go,
you did. Yeah.
"Why?" And the
Hmm.
guy goes, you cannot ask a question like that." And I jumped up to defend the three guys. I'm like, hold the phone for a second. Were these three guys ever trained? Did they ever go through a training education? Because people think they assume that everyone should know this. So I'm like, no, the organization and you, HR person, failed us by not taking us through a training so we could better understand those questions. And even when I think about in the 90s compared to today, those questions have even changed even more about what we should or cannot be asking, right? So I do think
Yeah.
the responsibilities do fall on the organization and leaders for that.
But those questions are still being
Yeah,
asked
yes,
of I mean, I still get
yes,
In a
yep,
different type of
yes,
way,
I
right?
get, especially, you know, not that I am necessarily gonna have another child, but I often still get this vibe that I don't know if she's gonna be able to continue because she may wanna have a child. I mean, they don't necessarily ask me, but you can some of the reference and some of the questions is like, well, what does your home environment look like? What do you like to do outside of work? What do like some of those questions also are challenging. I think as a woman,
right.
I don't appreciate getting those questions because I feel the question moves away from my ability to do the work. And maybe I've been just sensitive of having similar questions to the one that you experienced, Tom. I haven't really seen too many changes because I hear those stories, and I'm sure, LaKesha, you've had some similar questions, but I think some places have done a great job. But you're right, people don't get trained on how to ask questions and how to follow through, even with a candidate moving to the next round. In the nonprofit space, you would think that we would know all of this, but because we are so short staffed too, we don't necessarily have HR leaders on hand to help lead, and then
Yeah.
hiring recruiters can be challenging. Some organizations can't afford, a really experienced recruiter to help walk people through that. So, but thanks for bringing that. That I can't imagine what it was like for the woman in the room.
She never caught on. She never caught on.
Oh
I'm
But
sure
the
wow.
she
but
did.
definitely the me and the
Yeah.
manager, we caught on because we
Really?
slowly turned our head and looked at the guy
Yeah.
and we were like, "What's going on?" But you know what? You bring up a great point. Let me just say that I've caught myself saying like, "Oh, your last name. Tell me about that," because I'm very curious
I
about
get that
names.
one.
But you know what? It's like I have to now be doubly cautious. I'm like, that can open up doors to other
Yeah.
things. It could, or I've asked about where you're from. Like LaKesha, when you jumped on, we started talking about our home areas, right? Those questions can be, we have to, as you mentioned, stick to what are the skill sets we're looking for. And I think even these questions about, I know it's been in the past that we asked about how someone's perform, how do you perform? Because that past experience will give us a guidance as we move forward. But even those are dangerous too, because we may lock ourselves into a way of thinking like, oh, this is how this person responded in this situation. Therefore, they may respond. That's not true. We don't know. We don't have enough evidence. So,
Right. Those are interesting points that you guys made. Like I never even thought that when someone says, "Well, what do you like to do outside of work?" Because I don't have children. I'm not
Yeah.
married. Um, that it can, that they could be looking for something like to disqualify you. You know.
Oh, no, I think they're looking to be like, "Do you have children?" Is it
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh, I love to drive my daughter to ballet on Saturday morning."
Absolutely.
So I'm always like, "Why are you asking me this?" And maybe I've just been exposed to scenarios like Tom had said, so I'm always like, "Are you trying to understand if I have children, if I'm married?" So I don't see it as like oh, are you a well-rounded person? Or like what, you know, so I'm always cautious when I get those questions asked of me.
I have to share with you all that I was watching Will and Grace last night from the 90s. And,
Did you go back in time to watch it or
yes, and it's so funny we're talking about
That
this
was one
subject
of
now.
my favorite shows, by the way.
So
Well,
funny.
they were these two people up for partners. And the husband of the young lady goes, "Oh, so and so is having a baby." And she goes, "No, I'm not. I'm not having a baby right now." And she goes, "In fact, if I have a baby, I'm going to give it up." And everyone's laughing. What she's trying to get, because she knows what's going to come, and it happened. The head of the partner is like, "Oh, well, let's sit down to dinner." And Carrie, you could just go home now because you're going to have a baby. You're not going to be worth. It was just, and here we are talking about them. Like I just saw the episode last night.
Oh, wow.
Hilarious. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of shift a little bit, not too much, but you had talked about how you kind of got into the space of, yeah, you're right. There wasn't, when I moved into the space, there weren't like classes or programs on how to be a development officer 101. But I want to just, you had mentioned volunteering and just hearing about your background and wanting to be engaged in your community and your network. What do you love about what you do? I know it's a hard field because we all do it every day. It's challenging sometimes, not recognized for the heavy lifting that it takes for development officers and people in the nonprofit space who are always wearing multiple hats. But what do you love about what you do, and what motivates you about the profession and the future of the field?
I would say one of the things that I really like is telling the story of an organization, even if it's not like in the way of writing a newsletter or appeal, but even just, getting on the phone, talking to a prospect, and just like talking about the organization and finding a way to connect that, what our mission is, what our values are, with what motivates them to give, and that, whether it's an individual or whether it is a corporation and the person representing the corporation. So that is one thing that I really like. Of course, knowing that the work that I'm doing is actually making a difference. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it as much because there's like the office people and then there's
Yeah.
like the direct service
Yes.
people, but it's like, well, no, I'm bringing in, doing my job correctly, I'm bringing in resources that will really make a difference and will really help people. So I think that's great. And then I also, although sometimes it can be overwhelming when there's not a big enough team, but I do like having like the diversity in the work, being able to connect with different people, not exactly doing the same thing every day or every week. So there's multiple things, even though we're doing them over and over, but it's not just like one specific thing. So I really think that's great. And I would say, what do I, in terms of like the future, because I'm really motivated by, I would say motivated by seeing, and encouraged maybe would be a better word, by seeing how more opportunities are opening up. I think for um, people of color in the space, seeing more funders being specific with wanting to even give to like Black led or women led organizations, seeing people and organizations wanting to bring on more people of color onto their board. Because I just think that having many more diverse perspectives and life experiences will really just help the organization as a whole. And it's not going to only be, as Tom mentioned, like the white savior comp thing. It's going to be more
Mm-hmm.
people who
Yeah.
look like the communities that you're serving. And I'm not saying all the communities are, you know, people of color, because of course, there's all types of nonprofit organizations out here. But I think that just in some spaces, having that diversity is just really going to, I don't want to say like breathe fresh air. I don't, just to bring a different.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, just to lift up, one of the areas that I'm not seeing so much change as much, but larger universities and hospitals and healthcare systems, you mentioned boards. There isn't much
Mm-hmm.
diversity in board president roles. and in those larger institutions, major arts organizations. And we had talked about philanthropy and recognizing that there are Black philanthropists and leaders in a variety of industries and nonprofit spaces. And we just don't see a lot of the
Yeah.
diversity at the top of those nonprofit or those larger institutions on their boards. And I'm hopeful with some of the changes we're seeing and more of an inclusive model that hopefully those leaderships uh, positions change and more diversity also happens on executive board of those organizations. I
Hmm.
haven't seen too much. So I'd love to see more and also more women. Not as many women
Yes,
are leading those boards and those organizations. And that's usually a lot where I don't want to say the culture, but the environment, if the organization isn't changing and evolving, you can also always look to the top. And
absolutely.
what does that makeup look like?
I mean, now I definitely think there's
Yeah.
still a long way to go. I definitely think like exactly what you said. I like although there's changes,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
still large organizations, small organizations, the
Hmm.
boards, senior leadership. It's still not mostly or even half, for the most part, representative of people of color, of women. But I think that even like the baby steps that are happening is, on the right path.
We haven't touched on is mental health, and LaKesha, maybe,
Yes. That's like go
yeah,
back to the core. Yeah.
it could be that we bring everyone back together, or is it? What are your thoughts? Will we come back together and maybe touch on mental health in this space as a Black woman, as a person of color, as just a person?
That's actually,
Yeah,
yeah.
we should definitely do that.
Yeah.
Let's talk
Yeah.
about
Mhm.
that. Let's talk
Let's
about,
talk about our
yeah,
mental health.
mental
Yeah.
health. And, let's face it, mental health has always been an issue. We didn't speak about it. In the
Hmm.
last 3 years, when 2020 hit, more people were talking about it in many different ways. We're recognizing it. Companies are recognizing it. We're doing much, much more. We're still not doing enough, but we're doing much, much more. What are your thoughts about mental health? Let's start off with where we were, where we are today, and what do you do to protect yourself? You mentioned the music just now, but what do you do? What would you recommend for others?
Um, I think that I am more recently trying to be more conscious of my mental health, my mental wellness. It's funny because one of the organizations I worked for, we did mental health services, um, but sometimes you just don't take that time to kind of reset in, for yourself. So definitely, like you said, mentioning like with the pandemic, there's just more stressors and feeling like, oh, a lot of my outlets that I would normally do to kind of take some of the stress off of work, I'm no longer doing those things. So one thing that I do, weather permitting, that just does wonders for me is I ride my bike. I really like to be out in the open air. Of course, being from the Chicago area, being near the lake,
It's
it's
beautiful.
wonderful. Like the water just is calming, and of course the exercise, just brings in, endorphins and it's a stress relief. But then also just taking the time to sit in my thoughts and reset and things like that are important. I would say I try to journal. I don't do it as often as I should, but trying to journal as well, just to get some of those thoughts out. Um, and just trying to not let um, like negative self talk, which can happen sometimes,
Mhm.
right? Just when you maybe something didn't go your way, or let me speak about myself, something didn't go my way, then maybe a little bit of negative self talk comes in. So just not letting that creep it up. And then I also have all these little inspirational notes. So I try to have some like my desk at work and, have it somewhere at home just as reminders because sometimes you're not always going to just feel it naturally. So I
Yep.
just try to remind myself. And one more thing, I used to, pre-pandemic, I used to do kickboxing at this kickboxing gym, and that was amazing
Oh,
because
that sounds like
yes, it
fun.
gets out the just everything. So those are a few of the methods, and there's more. I'm trying to be more intentional and like read books and things that just self-awareness and wellness.
Mhm.
So those are a few of the
Yeah.
things. I could probably, again, I'm trying, it's like step by step. I'm trying to do more,
Yeah.
but those are the things that I'm started to implement more recently.
Yeah, Tom and I've talked about boundaries and burnout. And so, if we're not creating those boundaries to center our own uh, wellness and our mental health, you know, as you had mentioned, you like the variety of work. There's a lot. Our brains are constantly in this field. We're thinking about the external community. We're bridge builders between program colleagues and other colleagues within an organization and to the community. And so there's just so many levels of deep work we're doing. And events, huge events
Oh,
that you're planning,
yes.
and building relationships, it takes a toll, I think. And so it's really important for you to share that too. I think I love your idea about the inspirational notes to remind you of your why. And then being ready
Yeah.
to unplug yourself from your work is really hard, I think, for what we do. Because you're like, maybe, sitting and having something to eat and you're thinking, wait, I got to write that down, or, I got to, so it's really
Hmm.
important to really kind of put some boundaries.
I need to
Yeah.
work on the boundaries. I need to work on the boundaries, and I need to work on not working as many hours. Like that is something that I think is a work in progress for me, because you want to get the job done. Um, but I think that that's something that I can say one of the wellness pieces that I have to work on.
Mm.
I know, because you feel a rush to get it done by Friday, right? And then you want to get it done. And then you're like, oh my God, it's like 9 p.m. on Friday night. I'm still working on this
Mhm.
plan or something. Yeah,
Right.
I hear you.
I would ask you all, where do you think that's coming from? The reason why I asked that question is, first of all, being a nonprofit, the world we're in, we want to please everyone. We're people pleasers. That's one of the reasons we get into this world. But what I started recognizing is, as Black people, as women, that takes on a whole new thing of never saying no. Yet we want to come into a certain space looking a certain way. We want to make sure that no one can ever say to us that we're not providing or showing up a certain way. So we're going to always say yes. And I think that once I started recognizing where that was coming from, I could then put boundaries around myself, saying, I'm okay saying no because I saw my colleagues saying no. And it was about how you say no. I was thinking about
Mhm.
I don't have space right now. That does not work for me. The timing isn't right. It's about how we're saying it that gave us more freedom. So I think I've recognized that for myself, at least, it was, it wasn't that I didn't know how to say no. I didn't want to say no because I was a pleaser, but also I was afraid of saying no because of what it would make me look
Yes.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes afraid of saying no because people think, well, being a mother, I will just say, as this idea that not that fathers don't necessarily have this, not as much as mothers do, especially when you have just coming back from maternity leave, or you know um I always, and I still do, and I got to stop. It's like you make up excuses to, your child may have 104-degree temperature and you're making up
Mhm.
an excuse, but you really got to take them to the doctor, but you don't really want your employer to know, to think that you're like slacking. And so I'm always operating with like, oh my God, I have to demonstrate to them that I'm a hard worker, and I'm devoted and dedicated. And if I say no, they think I'm just like
Yeah.
incapable and not, and I think as a working mother, it's a challenge. And so your boundaries, it's hard to say no for that reason.
Mhm.
But I will still challenge us on, it needs to start with us. You know what I mean? We're There's something
Yeah.
in us preventing us from saying no because we're worried about what we're going to look like. It
Yes.
starts
Yeah.
there. So we need to be okay with saying,
Well, it's white American culture that's created the environment that you have to respond to an email in like 10 minutes.
yeah.
You have to, all, I'm like, I'm eating, so I can't.
Yeah, unfortunately, I failed that one. I failed that
Yeah.
one a long time ago because
Mhm.
even as you see that sometimes there's a day or two, there's more than a day or two before I respond because I'm like, I just got, I'm like, all right, you know, I'll tell you all, since coming back into the real world after the pandemic, coming back to this job, I've placed such boundaries around myself. At 5 o'clock, I shut it down. Now, there are going to be some times I can't because something, but 5 o'clock, I am now shutting things down. In fact, I stopped shutting down before that. If I can't get to an email, I just don't get to it. It still causes a little something, but I'm fighting it. I'm like, no.
I know. I've had the talk where people are like, don't send emails at 3 a.m. anymore because it creates a lot of stress. I don't do that anymore. Do you do that, LaKesha?
Oh, Lord.
I will, especially we just
you can admit it here.
Listen, we just came off of this big event, so I was like sending emails like 12:30 and 1 o'clock. I was like, these people are probably going to think that I'm nuts, and they probably are going to be like, why is she sending me this email at 1 a.m? And it's not that I expect them to be up, but it's like I'm up and I'm doing it. So, but I know people say like to schedule it for like 8 a.m. the next morning, like type it out and draft it and schedule it. But we'll see. I'm trying.
And
I shouldn't be up at 1 o'clock working, right? But
no, because you got to get on your bike, enjoy your ride along Lake Michigan. So the next morning. So.
Well, not at 1 o'clock in the morning. You're not riding your bike. I hope.
No, not safe.
Let me just say that too.
I sound like riding your bike. You should definitely probably come to Portland because we ride our bike or Seattle. Yeah.
Well, just to let you know, it's 70 degrees here, and I was looking at Chicago. It's 90. Well, it's dropped down. It's 91 degrees now.
It's because it's the evening, and they have 1,000% humidity. By the way,
yes, I won't be riding my bike today.
No, and Tom and I do not envy you right now.
No,
we have.
I live there. I know what
we have to admit, Tom, we have had the atmospheric river dump along Oregon and Portland. It's been like nonstop rain, but
I'm okay with that.
Okay with but I will tell you, we have no sun. You don't have sun in Seattle, do you? Yeah, there's no sun.
I'm okay with that too. I'm okay with that too.
I'm okay with that too. I would rather take that than your 101 and 1,000% humidity.
95. And let's face it, tomorrow it looks like it's going to be 81. There's going to be still high humidity there, 81 degrees.
I'll be riding my bike tomorrow, though.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you joining us, and I think Tom's gonna
me too.
Close it up for us. But I definitely want to have you back. We just scratched the surface, and especially the work that you're doing, and really being a part of helping to expand the definition of philanthropy. You brought that up. I would love to have a topic on that. I think it's one of the most important directions the sector is going. We need to revisit what we identify as philanthropy and how people get engaged, and creating more collective community fundraising as approaches. So would love to have you back to talk more about that too, particularly as it relates to the changes in the nonprofit space.
I agree along those same lines. Thank you so much for being part of that. And definitely as you brought us along your pathway, as you grew, as you change, and what you're recommending to what we should start looking at as leaders, as organizations, as we think about recruitment. Thank you so much for sharing all that. As always, we hope and wish you the best, but definitely, as Dinesh says, we need to bring you back and we need to talk about more stuff. And you may have subject matters that you think we should touch on. We would love to hear. We would love to hear that, and maybe we can talk about it.
Great. I would love to come back. Thank you so much. I was a little nervous about this, but you guys made it very comfortable, and thank you again for having me, and I would absolutely love to come back.
Well, thank you so much. To our audience, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing more on our next episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
That's right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
Join us next time as we share, advocate, and highlight experiences and ideals from nonprofit colleagues, leaders, and champions.
Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes.